Welcome back to the latest edition of Until Saturday, live emergency edition. This is the benefit of subscribing to the YouTube channel. Thank you all for being here live with us if you're here. And if you're a podcast listener, usually this is a nice time to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can be here live when things like this happen. And what is like this? Tennessee and Virginia are filing a lawsuit against the NCAA in federal court, which happened on Wednesday morning, challenging the organization's ban on using name, image, and likeness in recruiting, and all the buzzwords like inducement and all that stuff come into play. I'm joined by David Ubben, national college football reporter who is based in Knoxville, and Chris Fanini, national college football reporter who's also based here in Dallas with me, though I don't see him enough. And we're going to break this down. Dave, we'll start with you. You're got boots on the ground there. What is your take on this whole NIL situation, Nico, Spire Sports, all that stuff?
I think the specific details of the case are almost irrelevant at this point, and that is because this is such an existential case in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, whether or not they Tennessee or Spire, I should say, probably did violate the rules here, but the idea is that the rules are what's on trial here. And that is what is going to be the focus of the case, is are these rules fair? And it seems like, based on the Alston decision, that it's pretty clear that they are going to be pushing at the Alston precedent. And Chris, you do a lot more of the governance issues, but for me, this is like another pretty clear strike at ending the NCAA as a concept and getting us closer to a new division, something else in college sports. I think we're going to see more states, more people join this lawsuit, launch similar lawsuits, because there's blood in the water. And also lawyers like to get paid. I had 5 lawyers ring my doorbell this morning and say, hey, would you like to join a suit against the NCAA? I think this is what we're going to see. And so, again, I think that what actually happened in this case, the NCAA investigation, is sort of secondary to all of the existential issues hovering over this case.
Dave, Chris, before you kick it over to Chris, why don't you explain the Alston decision for people who are unaware
and the Tennessee one for people who don't.
Okay, so let's back it up a little bit. In short, the Alston decision was in the decision dropped in June, I think it's June 22nd of 2021, and basically said that the NCAA was artificially limiting players' ability to compensate themselves to make money off of their name, image, and likeness, violating the Sherman Act.
That's not what Alston. That's not what Alston.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Alston was just about schools being able to give unlimited education-related benefits to athletes. That was specifically what it was about. In that, Justice Kavanaugh released a scathing opinion. That was not the ruling, but it was his opinion that a lot of NCAA rules should be up for challenge and may be illegal, and basically invited people to start filing lawsuits about them. But the Alston ruling specifically was not about NIL. NIL was California state legislature passing their own rules with several years in advance of it becoming live. And then a bunch of other states did the same thing.
Ultimately forcing the NCAA to follow suit and get in line because of state law there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the outcome obviously was like 8 days later, the NCAA lifted the restrictor plates. We can monetize our NIL. And very quickly, it became a recruiting weapon, because everything in college football is recruiting. Everything in college sports is recruiting. And so some places were more aggressive than others. Tennessee, Oregon, Texas A&M, I guess Florida, a bunch of schools, and I say schools, the collectives that are loosely associated with the schools, very aggressive, some more aggressive than others. The ones that were most aggressive were the places that probably weren't already winning, but felt like they had the resources to win. And there weren't a lot of guidelines early on. And so schools were like, hey, we're gonna shoot first, ask questions later. And now some of that aggression, the NCAA is trying to push back on some of the guidelines that they later put in. And so, I think there's a wink to all of this. The idea that offering kids 6-7 digit contracts is not inducement. There was a wink to this. Okay. And now the NCAA wants to enforce a lot of these things, and the schools are saying no. The collectives, the schools, the states are saying, this is not going to stand. You are not going to punish us. Quite frankly, I'm surprised that we didn't see Florida State mobilized first, because they actually were penalized, and we haven't heard much from them since then.
Well, that was a negotiated resolution too.
That's what I think is odd.
They didn't fight it. So the
Mhm.
Tennessee case, you wrote a story about Spire Sports a couple of years ago about how NIL was helping in recruiting. And then our colleague Stuart Mandel wrote a story about how a prospect had signed an $8 million-ish contract with a collective, didn't name the player. Everybody kind of knew who the player was. And now it's out there.
Arch Manning, right?
And now it's out there that it was Nico, the quarterback who went to Tennessee, who signed with Tennessee 10 days after
committed 10 days after it signed.
Committed after he signed the NIL deal. And so that was very much out there. And now the NCAA is starting to crack down on the ones that were out there and were very public. Jaden Rashada, the other one that just started a couple of weeks ago. So this lawsuit comes up. So the NCAA is investigating Tennessee. We don't know all the specifics. Our colleagues at the New York Times said it involved an airplane ride. But Tennessee here, the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia are just attacking the concept of the rules in general. This is not a lawsuit that is saying the NCAA needs to be torn down, replaced, they should be employees, yada, yada, yada. They're just saying boosters should be able to pay recruits.
And I think this is a nice segue, guys, because the entire concept of the word inducement and the rules that were put in place in regards to the introduction and the rollout of NIL and how they were able to be employed are pretty unenforceable. Like when you think about it, and it's like something that we talked about even 2 years ago. And
we've been talking about this for a long time.
Like, how do you possibly prove what a person decides in the comfort of their own decision making? How is offering a deal any different than somebody saying, here's what you will make when you arrive? Everything is an inducement. Like coming to your school, recruiting in general is an inducement. So this is, we're in a situation right now where you saw teams, and we had Doug Maurice on the show here a few weeks ago, and he thought it was a really good analogy I wanted to share if you didn't hear that episode. But all the college football programs were kind of driving on the highway of NIL, right? Some teams were going the speed limit. Some teams were going a little bit over the speed limit in that grace period, and some were going 80 miles an hour. The teams that were going 80 miles an hour now are starting to get pulled over. But when they're pulled over now, we're starting to wonder whether or not the NCAA's speed limit was just and really in American law in terms of whether or not you're able to make as much money as you can, both on your name, image, and likeness, and your income potential are also called into question. And, the thing that I don't want to go down this path completely today, but it is unbelievable to me, if you start going down the rabbit hole of what you are allowed to do or what you're permitted to do to earn money, the types of rules that the NCAA could be attacked next. Like when it comes to eligibility limits, like what if somebody is making good money in NIL after 4 years or 5 years of eligibility, and they want to go work at Allstate Insurance? Like Talia could have, that could have been the springboard to that. So I think what we're really in the midst of isn't so much a Tennessee discussion or even a rules discussion. It's about whether or not the rules that are set in place are even something that we can navigate as a entity as we move forward into the new world where money and inducements and contracts and all the things that come into play as a recruiting tool, what it means for these players, how much they can earn. Like, can you even enforce any of this stuff? And if you can't enforce any of this stuff, what is the NCAA going to look like? And what are the rules going to look like? Because I want to make this clear. And I think that, like, I wrote a story or a column about Jim Harbaugh a few weeks ago and kind of just like told people to stop crying about the cheating and stuff. I do think that there is a place somewhere, somehow, where we have to govern it in some way. Like, you have to all be playing by the same rules and all on the same page, and you have to govern it, because if you don't, then it just turns into chaos.
Well, the Harbaugh cheating is like separate. That was like,
no, I'm just saying people have thought like, I'm like, oh, screw the rules. Like, I understand that rules are set in place in order to try to keep the guardrails, that buzzword, in place to keep everybody on the same road. And I do think to a certain extent that has to happen, but I don't know if rules like this that are limiting people's income potential is the way to do it. Obviously, Dave wrote a column 2 years ago about the CBA and employment and all that stuff that kind of puts an end to that. But this is a cross section of not Tennessee, but college football and how we're going to employ the financial aspect of all this.
And this ties into the lawsuit from a couple weeks back about the transfers. They argued, a number of state attorney generals, that now includes Tennessee and Virginia and the Department of Justice, argued that the limits on 1 year transfers is limiting a player's earning potential. if they have to sit out, if they transfer multiple times. Resulted, they got the temporary restraining order, became a preliminary injunction that at the moment, there's no limit on the number of transfers you can do. There are certain limits. You can't transfer between two teams in the same season and stuff like that, but you can't limit going to multiple schools. This is arguing basically the same thing, that you can't limit the possibility of somebody making money. So they referenced it in this lawsuit. They referenced the transfer one as well, because anything that involves potentially impacting the earning ability of players is going to be challenged.
Which is basically every NCAA law. And I think it's also worth, like, we saw a lot of big, powerful people get involved today. Obviously, the Tennessee AG filed the lawsuit. We've already seen a supportive statement from Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. It's worth noting that public opinion has swayed so far that this is a winning issue in the public. This is a winning issue for Republicans because this is a free market issue. This is a winning issue for Democrats because this is a workers' rights issue. And it is an election year. And I think you're going to see when Danny White or when Spire or whoever picks up the phone and calls a politician and say, hey, can we get some help? Can we get your backing? They're answering that call and they're saying yes, because this is a very popular issue. And so you're going to see this in other states, because whether you're red, whether you're blue in a state, whether you however high up you are in that state legislature, as a senator, as a governor, whoever, people, if you are carrying the flag and saying we are fighting for our right to be able to use our resources to get the best players we can, people are going to rally behind that. And so you're going to see more and more states and powerful people get on board with this, because it's a winning issue for literally everyone in politics. And I think you saw a piece of that today in Tennessee, and it's going to spread throughout the country.
We knew this was coming for 2 years. As soon as these things went into place, we knew at some point the NCAA was going to start looking into somebody for paying a player for getting them to come to their school, not school, a collective for coming to the school, and it was going to get challenged in court. And now we're at that point.
And I think it's important to make this clear, guys. And I don't know if everybody listening to this is aware, but Tennessee is pushing back at the notion that they should be facing any regulation or penalty because the governing body is penalizing a entity that isn't officially
that's part of this too.
Officially
third party,
a part of the Tennessee football program. And this is a statement that Tom Mars, the attorney here that is representing,
he's the Harlem Globetrotters to the NCAA's Washington Generals.
Yes, he released a statement. I'm trying to find it on the internet right now. Sorry but basically he said in early 2022, independent of the University of Tennessee or anyone associated with its athletic program, Spire Sports entered into a mutually beneficial contractual relationship with Nico that involved a limited assignment of his NIL rights, no matter which school he chose to attend. So you're starting to see the gray area between whether or not, the inducement actually was called for to go to Tennessee. And I think we all can read between the lines about what actually occurred there. But there's a lot of wiggle room here in terms of who was at play here, who was signing the checks, where the money came from, when the money was dispersed, and whether or not anybody officially a part of the Tennessee football program is even behind this to begin with. And if you start trying to get... This stuff doesn't even matter right now. I mean, the lawsuit is asking for a preliminary or a temporary restraining order by February 6th, within a week. So within a week, we will have a decision on whether or not you can
do anything.
Induce athletes with NIL. There will be basically no limits on NIL and whatever you want to do with it with prospects. So we're going to do that pretty quickly. Whether or not Tennessee.
But Chris, I think the point here is that there's no way to enforce this already anyway. So regardless of what the no limit thing is already in existence.
But then it's officially
but we've already
legal.
Pushed that point though, because if the thing here is that if you officially say it's Wild Wild West, anybody can go do whatever they want and pay whatever they want whenever they want, that's fine. But that's already kind of happening. And
but now there's no one saying that you should. There's no one saying.
So this is important for that standpoint though, because now they're removing the speed limit sign. It doesn't mean that people were driving the speed limit, and whether or not you can actually give somebody a ticket that they pay is that question here. And I think that's pretty important.
Here's my problem with Tennessee. So on June 30th, 2021, when NIL becomes legal everywhere, Tennessee put out a guidance like every other school did. And on this webpage that I have open, it says the following is prohibited under the NCAA's interim policy. Among that, NIL compensation contingent upon enrollment at a particular school. They knew you couldn't induce players to come to school. And they're trying to use the contract says he doesn't have to pick Tennessee, so therefore he didn't. I don't think the NCAA is stupid enough to believe that. And that's why.
Well, but you got to prove it in
it's
a
about
court.
proving.
That's the whole
It's proving
thing.
it in
That's
court
the
of
whole
law
thing.
and believing
We
it. Nobody
know,
believes it.
The NCAA enforcement process is not a court of law. Now we're in a court of law. But what's at contention in this lawsuit is not this particular contract. It's the idea of the rules in general. They're not going to court arguing that this contract keeps Tennessee safe from NCAA rules. They're saying the rules don't matter. So that's why it's kind of separate.
I have two questions for you, Chris. Number one, what are the Vegas odds that we get a temporary restraining order in the next 72 hours? I would say very heavy in favor of them winning this. Pointing to Alston seems like a catch-all. Would you agree with that?
So probably there was an interesting thread here from Sam Elrich, who is a Boise State professor and a college sports lawyer expert and stuff like this. And he makes the point that the lawsuit points out Tennessee state laws and Virginia state laws regarding NIL, but they're not filing a complaint based on those state laws. They're only filing the complaint under antitrust, under the Sherman Act. So the state laws do, I guess, technically bar NIL deals that are inducements. And NCAA is probably going to bring that up in a pushback. Also, apparently this district court has typically been NCAA friendly in the past. However, post Alston, things can change. And anything that's arguing anti-competitive money for players.
It just gets murky because you can be very clever with it. I mean, even if you go back to the statement that Mars, put out there, it's just the parties agreed that their contractual rights and obligations would be governed by the California law, which freely allows prospective college athletes to enter into such agreements. So it's like even like state law is different from state to state, which just adds another layer of complications to which is why they're only
filing under Sherman Antitrust Act.
Yeah,
the state laws are not being contested here.
My second question for you, Chris, from where I'm sitting, and I am but a wee analyst, whatever we want to call it.
You are a wee analyst. I'll give you that. Right, Chris?
It feels like to me that this is probably going to be the first step toward getting something close to Charlie Baker's plan for a new division. There's been people talking about a break off for a long time. I always say it has never made sense that Alabama football is governed by the same body as UMass field hockey or whatever we want to call it. Okay. Well, Charlie Baker's talking about this new subdivision, whatever we want to call it, where there's a price of admission to get in. Getting to that point, the rules governing that, the price of admission itself, I think will be under debate. But do you see this as the first step toward making something resembling that a reality? Because I feel like that's what it seems like to me.
I don't think this is the first step. I think some of the other lawsuits that are way bigger and more existential are the first step. And Charlie Baker's proposal basically needs congressional exemption to happen.
He said in Vegas, a little antitrust exemption.
They need Congress to say athletes are not employees. And based on what happened a week or two ago in that hearing, it does not sound like that is happening anytime soon. To Charlie Baker's credit, he is trying. He is earnestly trying to find a solution that keeps the system intact while allowing those players to make a heck of a lot more money than they're making now. It would actually bring NIL in-house as well and could change the result of the value of collectives and whether or not they exist, which is the whole interesting part of this. Is that which is why it makes perfect. Like Danny White is supporting this lawsuit and everything because sure, Danny White and Tennessee are happy to have the boosters pay for all the players because then Tennessee ain't have to pay for the players. The schools don't want to pay for the players, and that's the problem. Is everybody saying, "Well, go to this model, go to that, do this." The schools don't want to pay the players. And they have held back as long as they possibly can from anything that can actually do that. So they are happy to have the collectives, have the fans, have the boosters pay the players.
And I think
don't want to do it.
So I think it's worth noting, Chris, the schools don't want to pay the players. It's not because they're just evil. I disagree with a lot of things they do, but it's not because they're just evil. It's that they've been pretending to be a nonprofit for a long time, pumping all the money into something because it has to go somewhere. It's mostly gone to facilities and coaching contracts.
Mhm.
And you've been living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck for decades, despite the fact that you've been making a ton of money. And then somebody comes in and says, hey, you know how you've been living paycheck to paycheck and you don't have any money in your savings account? Well, your expenses are about to go up like 80%. That's basically what's happening, and that's why they're
But
fighting
Dave
against,
also has to be acknowledged that
players.
a lot of the television contracts that are going to be rewritten in the future is going to increase the income of this too. So
yeah,
like
but it's not enough. You're going to have to completely restructure how the economics of an athletic department work in the new era.
It is extremely complicated. It is not simple to say make them employees and collective bargain and then you're good.
Yeah.
No, because then there's all sorts of employee laws that come along with it. It is not a simple fix. There is no simple fix to any of this, whether or not they're employees, whether or not they're not. It's a whole mess. I do think we can wrap this up here, but I always go back to the NCAA football video game lawsuit from Ed O'Bannon and how he didn't want the game to go away. He just wanted players to make money from the game. And EA Sports was willing to pay players to be in the game. And the NCAA said no. And that's why the game went away. And then these things kept building and building, and the NCAA wouldn't give an inch on anything. And then eventually, state governments and judges noticed when coaches were making $10 million and players weren't making anything, the rules were going to change. If they had just let the players have their video game money, if they had just let the players have a slice of the television revenue here and there, I don't think a lot of this mess would have happened. They pushed back against it so hard for so long that the dam eventually burst. And if they had just made some steps along the way, this is a mess that was created by administrators in the NCAA and everybody who's been in charge.
I looked up these real quickly. I looked up these numbers recently. In 1991, the College Football Association, which is a group of about 64 teams, I think Notre Dame left it, but they signed a new deal with ABC. And combined with ESPN, they're making about $69 million to split between 64 of them. It was about $1 million a school in TV money. Last year, the Big Ten gave its members $58.8 million in TV money. The SEC gave their members $49.9 million. The money has gone up over 5,000% in 30 years.
Yeah.
And so, again, that money had to go somewhere. That's why all the stadiums in college and the facilities are much, much nicer than the NFL, because the NFL is a business. They don't pretend to be a nonprofit. Their facilities are not usually very good, and their players are very well compensated. And I don't hear anybody in the NFL saying, I love this deal that I'm getting, but I wish my locker had an LCD screen in it. I miss the LCD screen with my name and some highlights. It's so terrible being in the NFL. And so, again, that's an existential point to say there's been a ton of money, and just because the players get a little bit more, they got a nice facility. Oh, the scholarship, well, the rising costs of higher education. It hadn't risen as much as the TV money has, and the schools do not want to share the TV money. And I think we're getting close to a point where college football will be adopting something resembling employment, resembling revenue sharing. Whether it's those things in reality, I think in practicality, it's similar to the NIL discussion, okay? NIL exists, but in reality, pay-for-play is already here. It's just not that in name. And I suspect that college sports will be something resembling employment, resembling revenue sharing. Certainly in our lifetimes, maybe what, Chris? 5 years?
Well, shoot, within a week, it might be legal.
Well, but I'm talking about like a new structure. Like, how long will it take, do you think, for college football to get to a new structure where players, coaches, administrators are saying,
I would take the under on 10 years.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I think that it's just becoming untenable. Like we can't have a world where it's just lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits and everybody. And the thing that's so funny, and I got a text from a P5 staffer who was following along, and he goes, I was at the coaches convention that Dave Ubben was at in Nashville a few weeks ago, and he said if you polled all the coaches that were in there, I don't think we could have come to a consensus or an agreement on what the rules actually are. Yeah. So you have to get back to a place. Like, I still am for getting to a spot where we can just go back to competition and recruiting, and I have to deal with a bunch of like we didn't get into sports writing because this is fun. You know, I know Chris likes it,
Mhm.
but you know, I think
Yeah.
everybody's just kind of trying to get to a point where players are fairly compensated, the rules make sense, people know what the rules are, and everybody's playing by the same set of them. So
Mhm.
I think this is a very complex issue. I think that we broke some ground today for 25 minutes, and we are going to continue to do so because this is just the tip of the iceberg as it pertains to this stuff until we get to that over/under point where we are at a new system or a new solution. So, Chris and Dave, I really appreciate you guys. I'm Ari Wasserman. That was an emergency edition of Until Saturday. We will be up to speed on all this stuff and keeping you guys posted. So, thanks so much for watching. And if you are watching right now and you're not subscribed, we're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers before the football season. If you could do that for us, help promote the channel, help promote the show, would be really awesome. So, thanks again. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you guys soon.
A turnover chain never would have.